They took Marvin Harrison Jr. at 4, and you and I both feel like he's the best player in this draft. So
I do, yeah.
talk to me about Marv a little bit.
Dude, what's there to say? I mean, 6'3", 209 pounds, 31-inch arms, I believe. Yeah. I mean, 9.5-inch hands, I think is what I have here. That's a freak of nature, dude. I mean, that is like, that's gotta be, when I was like doing all this kind of scouting for this video and looking at all these Arizona Cardinals things, I watched this video on YouTube and this guy said, he's the best receiver I've ever scouted, and you're like, yeah, that checks out to me. There's always a flaw that you can find in somebody's game. And I don't claim to be a scout at all, right? So if I can go through and find a flaw, real scouts can. And when I watch this kid, I'm like, oh, Hall of Famer. You know what I mean? Like this is like the most polished player I've ever seen come into the league. And he puts up 1,000+ yards last year. I think it was 14 touchdowns, and he had Kyle McCord throwing him the ball. You and I know this well. We're Big Ten guys. We're Michigan guys. Kyle McCord sucks. He's not a good quarterback.
Right.
So
he still won the Blinkoff Award as well.
That's what I mean. To have those numbers with a quarterback who objectively isn't good, right? Like, didn't he leave and go to Syracuse or something like that?
Yeah, so, they got a transfer in this year.
They kicked him out. They're like, yeah, you didn't beat Michigan. You got to get out of here. And all year, I think I was watching Marv thinking, in my head thinking, Michigan's we're winning the Natty this year. This is the year. This is the year. And then you're staring at that game in late November, and you're like, please don't come in here and ruin my party. Please don't come in here and ruin my party.
What I mean? He balled in that game.
And he almost did. No, he really almost did. And you think, when it comes to Michigan secondary, right? Like, it's a very good secondary. You think Mikey Sanders still. You think Will Johnson. You're like, yeah, we're gonna lock him down. No, we didn't. We sure didn't.
No, we didn't.
You know what I mean? Like, he had his way, and it.
Yeah. We did lock down a lot of other players too that we played.
We did.
Against,
no, 100%.
Including
100%
Roman
we did.
Doomsday.
Yes, 100% we did. So to see Marv, have 100+ yards in that game, and I think he ran a touchdown. I don't know if he caught a touchdown, but he ran a touchdown in for sure. Did he catch a touchdown?
I think he had that big catch at the end of the first half that put them in position, or at the end of the
perfect.
Going into halftime. I mean, I'm talking about.
He had a couple amazing catches in that game that were absolutely game changing moments, and I just think when you think about, you and I talk a lot about like your landing spot, right? And when you're going into a situation where there's not really a number 2 involved, there's not really a lot of mouths to feed, and you have a quarterback who we've seen can be a top 10 talent when given, the proper pieces around him, you have to imagine that like this kid's gonna pop off this year. Like I don't know if it's like outlandish to say, this time next year we should be talking about him as a top 10 receiver and probably more of like a top 8 receiver, right? That's really the ceiling I have for him just in his rookie year, which I think is insane, right? I've never talked about a player like, oh yeah, he'll be top 10 next year, where I really truly believe it.
I think he's the best since Jamar that we've had. But even Jamar,
even that, it's like I wasn't. Yeah, I was high on Jamar, but I wasn't like.
Not like
he'll be the best receiver in the league next year, right? It's like Marv. If you told me next year Marv was like, there was 5 receivers better than him, 6 receivers better than him, I'd be like, yeah, who are those 6 though? You know what I mean? Like that's really how I feel about him. So. Yeah, man, I don't know. I mean, I think you can't go wrong there. You can't go wrong taking a generational talent. And I think as you and I have touched on before, I think he is the generational talent of this draft. Not Caleb, not Jaden Daniels, not Drake May. It's Marv. But that's my spiel, man. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
I totally agree. And the thing is, you've seen what like Brian Hartline, Ohio State's receiver coach, has come out and said about him. And I know people are going to say like, well, that's his coach. He's got to say this, but you have to understand, to be able to separate in terms of optical talent from Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Jackson Smith and Jigba with a quarterback downgrade, right? it can't be overstated. That's a huge deal, and that's an incredible. That's a huge indictment on how gifted this guy is at playing receiver. Because those are 3 first-round NFL receivers,
Mm-hmm.
and he looked better than all of those guys looked at their pinnacle moments at Ohio State, and they had CJ. So to
Mm-hmm.
go down to Kyle McCord and still look better than those guys did, it's huge, and those guys are no
Period.
slouches. Um, Another point about Marv and kind of tying into this Arizona roster in general, I did want to touch
Mm-hmm.
on was the situational aspect in terms of replacement. He's replacing Hollywood Brown as the
Mm-hmm.
de facto number 1 wide receiver on this team. They do have guys like Michael Wilson there as a 2, and I think their tight end Trey McBride is actually their real 2. But for all intents and purposes, Marv is the 1. And last season, for all intents and purposes, Hollywood Brown was the 1. Um, I think what Arizona learned and what anybody paying attention learned is that uh, Hollywood Brown is a very talented weapon, but by no
Mm-hmm.
means a number 1 receiver. I
No.
did some digging on this out of curiosity because it was just bothering me. I felt like he had a down year kind of again, and I looked at his numbers. He finished with 51 catches, 574 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Um,
Mm.
and I thought about this, and I was
That
like,
ain't it.
those seem like wide receiver 2 numbers. But then I did more research, and I looked, and the 2 kind of young top wide receiver 2s that I consider to be the most elite 2s in the NFL, outside of maybe Brandon Ayuk, because it's a
Mm-hmm.
little more difficult by committee in San Francisco to
Sure.
judge who the 1 is. But clear cut 2s. Um, Devonta Smith had 81 catches for 1,066 yards and 7 touchdowns. Waddle, who also missed a handful of games during the year, just a couple, the way that Hollywood did, had 72 catches for over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns as well. So we're talking double the yardage, 20 more catches. In Smith's case, almost double the
Yeah.
touchdowns, double the yardage, 30 more catches. Um, that's not going to get it done as a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, period. And I
No.
love Hollywood. I love his new landing spot. I think he's a very gifted, explosive playmaking threat, but he's not a 1. And I think bringing in a 1 like this, if you're Arizona, is huge. And I
Makes a
think they brought
huge
in the
difference.
1 of 1s
Yep.
without having to pay
Agreed.
a Jefferson or somebody to that
Yeah.
level. That's the only other way you were going to get a guy this good. And getting him on a rookie
Mm-hmm.
deal, you guys are lucky, man.
Yeah, man. I
You're
mean, you have him
lucky.
for free for 5 years. I mean,
Yep.
really,
Yep.
it's. I think it was the easiest pick in the draft, right? I mean, probably Caleb was really the one, but even then, I mean, you might have another couple other quarterbacks that you really like. The JJ
Yeah.
talk, the Jaden Daniels talk, even Drake May, right? I mean, all those guys were kind of in that same group. Caleb was above him, but you could convince yourself. I mean, I know there was talks of Neighbors being wide receiver 1. He was never that, in my opinion. It was always Marv. He's
Right.
just got some. He's just got it. You know what I mean? And that's not to say Neighbors doesn't, but when you're 6'3", 210 pounds, and have the balance that he does, I mean, dude,
Yeah.
he makes some of the craziest catches ever.
Yeah.
And it's like how did you do that? How did you
Yeah.
get your foot down?